Hello there everybody, and welcome to a new build guide for Age of Wonders 4. This one has a build for the Reavers, and it's the ranged build because we all love ranged builds, and it is fundamentally overpowered in my humble opinion, but I'll let you decide afterwards. This build has been playtested in brutal difficulty, and I've been stomping over my enemies ever since I started the game. So I'll introduce to you what we got here, and I hope you will have some good fun with it as well. I want to start with racial and cultural traits. Since we are now able to build more detailed trait-wise, I went for a nice mix here. Keen-sighted. If I go for a ranged build, I want accuracy. This is very, very important because no accuracy, no fun. Sneaky is a really nice thing to have because the Reaver faction has a very, very easy time in setting up flanking attacks. This is so good, especially on our mage locks. More about that in a hot minute. And with the last point, I went for hardy because it never hurts to have a few more HP. I think you can differ as much as you want, but I think as keen-sighted as well as sneaky are so good for the Reaver faction. But if you think better combo comes to mind, let me know in the comment section. I really am curious to know what you guys think. Culture trait-wise, I went for runesmiths because that is just a oldie goldie, however you want to call it. We have a lot of unit enchantments. Ranged unit builds often rely on a lot of unit enchantments, and yeah, we can save up mana for that. But it is not really a required thing. Fabled Hunters is easy to underestimate, but it is so good for this build. First off, we start off with an extra ranged unit. That's one of our really powerful mage locks, and this is really good to have because it gives you a real good ranged attack right from the get-go. But also, we get a +1 on ranged and skirmisher units. Since we are one of the very few cultures that feature 2 skirmisher units right from the cultural roster, it's really good. And the extra resources, it's easy to underestimate how good these are. We get extra from every resource node, and this means, especially on high difficulty levels, this trait is even more powerful. You really get a lot of resource. What is a really worthy alternative here is to skip out either runesmiths or fabled hunters. I would recommend actually to swap out runesmiths in favor of keeping fabled hunters, but that's just me. Is any arcane trait. Really, any arcane trait, whatever comes to mind. It's all about getting the threshold of our astral affinity to 3. This is something which unlocks later down the road a very powerful tome, which you won't have otherwise. Now, this is the setup here. I want to talk next a little bit about the cultural military roster that you will have available for yourself. So you got to start with, well, we're starting with the scouts here. We got the observers, which are marking scouts, but apart from that, they are mechanical, so there's not much more to say about these. The mercenaries and the harriers are the backbone of your early aggression. These guys can do so much heavy lifting. Harriers are skirmishers which can immobilize and mark an enemy, and the cultural trait of the Reavers gives you 10% more damage per marking stack. So marking is totally powerful for this faction. So Harriers come with an innate marking stat, and their melee attack hits quite hard too. But apart from that, they are just squishy as skirmishes are. The mercenaries can push back units, so they are the dudes that you will use to free up your ranged units, and this skill is so good. I not only have used it to push my enemies away from my ranged attackers, sometimes I also push my enemies out of their cover and get them into an easier line of sight. This drive back skill is amazing, and it also does a decent amount of damage and is piercing, so it's even powerful against heavily armored units. So this is really cool, and these guys only downside lies in being more costly than other tier 1 units, but in all honesty, you don't really feel that much. Tier 2, we have the mage locks. Their downside comes with a 3 action attack, but it hits like a truck. It's even piercing their defenses, so it's strong against high tier units, and low tier units it's just a strong attack. If you can't fire, you can take aim, and that just applies a unit of marked on the enemy, so they can lower the enemy's defenses against range attacks and amplify the damage for your melee guys. So this is really cool. This makes them very versatile, although in my humble opinion they are not enough for a ranged build. That's why we use later down the road the Blade Runner, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Overseers are your supporters, they are your healers, and they also mark and blind the enemy. Blinded enemies are easy to be hit by melee guys because it cancels out the retaliation, and marking, well, it's just what it is. Dragoons are your tier 3 guys for skirmishing. Their big things are harrying shot comes as a source of distraction. That's why we go for flanking, because we can put flanking on whatever we want to, and we have 2 types of skirmishes, so flanking is really an option for us, and the harrying shot is also piercing. But the big sales point of these guys is the Master Skirmisher trait, which allows them to hit and run away, because their traits are so that they can't provoke opportunity attacks. They can go in, burst down somebody, go out. It's amazing. It's really giving you so much control over the battlefield. And last but not least, we have the Magelock Cannon, which can be only built with war spoils, which come from warfares against other players or free cities. So these are kind of like your special unit, and they are really amazing. They destroy obstacles, and they are utilizing a line shot, and they always hit. So there's no dodging, no nothing. They don't come with much more traits except for being a siege breaker unit. So these guys are really your AoE ranged units. So that's your cultural roster. Make good use of it, and we're going to talk about that in a hot minute as well. I want to cover next your tomes. So when we go for the tomes, we run here as the very first one. I like to start with Tome of Roots. Tome of Roots offers you all the tools you need to get into the game early on. Healing Roots helps you against your very squishy early nature. Vine Prison is just overpowered as hell, since you just put it down and the enemies will prefer to one-shot your vines instead of attacking your people. It's amazing. It's a super powerful spell. Blight Blades and Poison Arrows upgrades your ranged units and your skirmishers. And Blight Blades, of course, goes for your melee guys, and Poison will amplify your damage henceforth. Entwined Thralls are skirmishes, so they fit into your play plan really well, but most importantly, they transform into Entwined Protectors at the end of their career. This is amazing because shield units are really good for your strategy, and shield units that can do a point-blank AoE heal once per fight are even better. So what's left to say is you get a Herbalist node, which is really cool too. The other tier 1 tome I run for this build is Enchantment. Enchantment brings so many things for your build that you want to have. First and foremostly, of course, Seeker Arrows. Especially with the Mage Locks, the extra range is amazing, because it means you don't need to reposition your Mage Locks as often if they stand on a good spot. That 1 point of extra range comes in handy, but it is really important to stress out, it applies on your skirmishes as well. All skirmishes have a secondary range attack that can be applied now from a higher distance. This is so powerful for this build because it gets the most out of this enchantment. We also run Sundering Blades, which are really good because we are mostly into physical damage, so this spell will apply Sundered Defense, and Sundered Defense is just what we need. It lowers the enemy's physical resistance and also their status resistance, so our immobilizing effects and marking effects can be easier applied. Spell-Tempered Shields, yeah, we don't run too many shield units, we don't have any native shield units. I recommend to pick up this later when you have shield units. And Copper Golem, I like this because it gives you a summonable unit that can replace your native spear units if they die along the way. Really cool stuff, especially since these guys evolve into something better. Copper Golems can easily replace your mercenaries almost entirely, although they don't have the tasty pushback skill. Choose to your own liking. Awakened Tools is pretty nifty too, but I don't run it too much in this build. Next up, Tome of Glades. This is the first tier 2 tome to pick in my book. It is much better than the Winds tome, which would offer you a nice ranged attacker too. But the Glade Runner synergizes way too good with the Reavers. Loan through the Tracker's Mark. Tracker's Mark applies 2 stacks of marked and it sunders defenses. It's also a free action, so Glade Runners can amplify the damage on one target by 20% from all your Reavers, and then they can shoot their full salvo. The Glade Runners are your missing link between the lacking agility of your mage locks and the rest of your ranged strategy. They hit hard. They can hit even harder when you have the enchantment that gives them the Reaver traits as well. That one that gives them extra damage for marked targets, and it's amazing. These guys are the point where your build lifts off and takes over the map. Entwine Protectors, they can be summoned, they are your shield units, they can be put into front, and they can die for your build, and it's really good to have them. Aspect of Root gives you the ability for your polearm units to do that point-blank AoE heal. I love it. This upgrades your remaining tier 1 units so much, and it applies also to your golems if you use any. The Sacred Meadow also is very worth mentioning because the Reavers are chronically bad at food production, so this thing is also really useful to have because it can give you a little bit more of a useful farm. Alright, moving over to Scrying Tome. Scrying Tome is a tome that is practically only really useful for the Reavers, but boy is it useful. So Mental Mark gives you the ability to put a 20% marking or a 20% damage buff, so to say, on the enemy. It also strips the enemy's evasion, so this build is extremely good at achieving high accuracy rates, especially once you run guided projectiles. Obscuring terrain isn't a problem anymore, and then we get the Watcher. The Watcher is, again, a summonable unit. Its power will be lackluster when it comes down to the attacks alone, because we don't have too much amplification for battle mages, but Psychic Gaze is really powerful because it allows your overseers to subdue enemy units easier. I didn't mention subduing before in the unit overview because I want to mention it in the battle pattern, but just wanted to mention that. But apart from that, it stuns, it marks, it's just a nice nuke, with the only downside of being on a cooldown afterwards, but these guys also fit really, really well into your game plan. The rest of the book isn't too interesting, though, sadly. So we're now entering the tier 3 books. I find Transmutation the last of the books that I really recommend as kind of a must-have. I consider the build complete after that. I'll be going into some options, though. Transmutation, why? Transmuters. AoE stuns are amazing for your build because your overseers can subdue anybody who's immobilized, and also a AoE stun is always amazing. Shift bolts takes away the enemy's defenses and gives your unit's defense. It's not so much about that, it's mostly about having one transmuter in your stockpile to have that nice AoE stun. But Transmutation is mostly useful here for Adaptive Armor, which gives you more magic resistance, and Steel Skin, which gives you more physical resistance, and Melt Armor, which gives you the ability to debuff the enemy's defenses and nuke a little bit. So altogether, you have a lot of nuking power in that book. So, when we move on over to other options, like I mentioned already, if you have 3 Astral Affinity, I recommend Amplification as another tier 3 book to pick up. Amplified Arrows gives your units amazing AoE qualities. Frenzying Focus upgrades the whole battle mage and support backbone of your army insofar as they will do damage if they keep hitting long enough. Astral Blood is really cool because it, again, upgrades the entirety of your army because you will gain critical hit whenever you cast spells. It's amazing. It is so good for ranged attackers. And the rest of the book isn't too amazing. So, other tier 3 options I strongly recommend here. In tier 3, since we run a nature heavy build, I recommend to pick up in the tier 3 either Vigor or Paradise or Cycles, with a bias towards Vigor. This is simply because Vigor offers strong throwaway units, so you can put these things to die when you need to sacrifice something in the later stages of the game when the combats grow really big. It also powers up your throwaway units that you summon via empowered beasts. Super growth makes everybody in your race more beefy. I love this one. It's small, it's nifty, it's powerful. And Totem of the Wild, more throwaway units, and Unleash Beast gives you the ability to power up your throwaway units, but it also gives you the ability to power up your Dragoons again. Should take that into consideration. Animal Handler, well, it's powerful. We run a little bit of cavalry, so we can't keep that. The Cycle's Tome is interesting because of the Projectiles of Decay, which is an amazingly powerful status. So you shouldn't take that as an you shouldn't overlook that. The other spells here, though, I don't like them too much. Diffuse Health is a nice healing spell if you like that. Parting Gifts, I don't like it because you gamble on units dying, but it is a strong synergy with your vines of the tier 1 tome, the what's it called, Roots tome, so because it triggers also healing when they die. And the Druid of the Cycle, well, he can resurrect units if he kills somebody, but all in all, I don't see this tome too fitting. I would recommend more the Vigor, because you really profit a lot from having units that you can't just throw away. Now, tier 4 wise, Paradise is a really powerful one. We gain Gaia's Chosen, which powers up our units massively. They also turn to plants. Sometimes that can be really useful depending on your build. Exhilarating Pollen is stupidly powerful because we picked flanking, we picked sneaky, so field-wide distraction, hooray, and a little bit of Empire boosts, never heard. And the other tier 4 tome I would be recommending here, where tomes are Crucible, if you have the upper hand on the enemy, because Meteor Arrows is just amazing, and a little bit of extra nuking power never hurts. But if you need to be a bit more strategic, Tome of Severing is also amazing here, due to the simple reason it allows us to disrupt the enemy's enchantments with our pole arms. So we should run more pole arms with that variant. Or shield units have the ability to block enemies' statuses. The Severing Golem can strip enemy statuses from your units, so it's cancel out debuffs. So this is more of a strategic approach. We can't pick it because our materium value is that high. Last but not least, a couple of worthy picks to backtrack into if you don't want to go higher, because nowadays we don't need to anymore. Very powerful picks here are as well the Tome of Alchemy, because Miasma is powerful in our build because we already have a couple of different statuses, and Affliction gives us more damage potential, as well as the Mysterious Tonic and Anti-Magic Tincture allows you to do some status cleansing. We have the Tome of the Horde as a worthy thing to backtrack into because Spawnkin is really powerful. Just don't pick that if you want to use Super Growth, but Spawnkin is really powerful. Houndmaster goes into this build really, really well, and Fury of the Horde is also really cool. Really good stuff. And another one that's easy to overlook but stupidly interesting for this build as well is the Tome of the Inquisition, because it applies the Inquisitor's Mark. Inquisitor's Mark gives your ranged units and skirmishers the chance to condemn the enemy. Condemnation lowers the enemy's status resistance, and status resistance can become a problem later on higher tier units, or if the enemy stacks up a lot of status resistance. Condemnation can help you to overcome that and keep up the marking stacks, because without marking stacks, your damage will fall off. You need that marking stacks. So, next thing I want to talk about is your military strategy. So I have a couple of rosters that you can look into, and I think this is a good example of how your armies can and should look like. The Overseers have the Subdue skill, which allows you to subdue a immobilized unit. It has to be immobilized in the very turn that you want to subdue, and it gives you the ability to buy the unit after the combat for war spoils. Also, a nice side effect is that the enemy unit is also taken out of combat, so you can subdue whatever you want to pick up. That means, military-wise, you are always free to pick up what you want. Ideally, your rosters want to have 1 or 2 defensive units. Here are run 1 shield, and the rest just ranged units. So, and in every roster, of course, a hero. So 1 hero, 1 or 2 defensive units, and the rest you fill up with ranged units to your own liking. This is pretty much it. Combat-wise, it is important for you to make best use out of your heals, and if somebody should die, always try to sacrifice away the lowest quality of your units. So if somebody should die, always go for the mercenaries first, or summonable units if you have more mana. The big benefit of this build is you have always the option to either recruit units like crazy or also summon units like crazy. So if you have a lot of mana or a lot of gold or both, you will always have good opportunities to summon new units. Combat-wise, you want to go into the offensive right from the beginning. You want to have combat wherever you can. The early game of the Reavers is quite legendary with their tier 1 units, and the moment you have your second town hall and access to mage locks and overseers, you're basically able to topple over whatever is on the field. I had no problem on brutal difficulty even. I recommend taking the first free city around you once you have 2 stacks of units available at your disposal. It shouldn't be too much of a problem at that point. The biggest thing that's important to note here is that with the Reavers, you want to play really aggressive early on and the entire game on, because the war spoils you got can be transformed, of course, into cannons, but also into extortion of other free cities, and you always want to have a steady influx of these war spoils, simply out of the reason because you can use mage lock cannons kind of as a free unit. This is amazing because they really cost you only the war spoils. They don't cost any gold. They do cost upkeep though, but it is as it is. All in all, when you're playing Reavers with this build, I do recommend though to try to keep fighting your enemies and keep punching them as much as possible, and try to have as many armies as you can possibly keep up while building up your empire, because you're really best at dishing out blows wherever you can, and with that setup it is quite easy. Just keep in mind that under all circumstances you want to keep your ranged units alive, and your frontliners are here to die for your plans. When it comes down to heroes, I strongly recommend picking up skill-wise things that either heal in the signature skills, or things that summon things that you can't toss into the enemy. These 2 spells, like for many strategies, are exceedingly good. So support is, by the way, the thing you need most, and one of your most glaring weaknesses in this build is being squishy. So due to the fact though that you can pick up hero skills for that, and you can pick up with the overseers whatever you want to with the subdue skill, you should really take this into account. Another thing that I want to mention here is spur to action. When you skill up your heroes, this is something that, if you are into support skills, is amazing on the mage locks, because the mage locks take a full turn, so with spur to action you can position them and shoot, and it's pretty good because every hero can learn that. Now, I'll leave the rest up to you. I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough. We're going to finish up this video with a nice little auto combat that you can witness, and I'm all ears, and let me know in the comments how you liked it, what you guys think, and let me also know what kind of builds you want to see next. I'm currently working on a miasma-based one for the Mystics, but we'll see about that. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, consider subscribing, I'd be delighted to have you guys, and thanks a lot for watching. Down in the description box you will find a lot of links. Among these, Patreon, PayPal, and Buy Me a Coffee. I'd be really delighted if you give them a look. I want to thank all the supporters of the channel. I really, really appreciate you guys, and we're going to go in the next couple of builds over more Empires and Ashes things. This ranged build, as a last word, is so powerful because I really had no problems whatsoever in getting my upper hand with this. At one point, I defeated 3 armies of an independent city in one turn just with tier 1 and tier 2 units, so you can do a lot, but keep in mind you need that regeneration. So, you guys, thank you for watching this. This was a lot of pleasure, and have fun. Bye-bye.